So over the weekend, there wasn't any big UFC show, but there was a bare knuckle boxing event. Prior to it, there was this weird situation where Paulie Malignaggi and Artur Lobov got into a bit of an issue at a gym where Malignaggi ends up slapping Lobov in the face to set up a future fight between the two of them. There's not a whole lot for me really to mention here. I think the point of this video isn't so much to talk about the specific event, but more to talk about bare knuckle boxing becoming a thing now in combat sports and whether or not I'm interested in it or think it really should be of interest to anyone at this point. For me, a big reason I'm an MMA fan is because it's the most realistic form of fighting that's out there right now, or at least among the most realistic forms of fighting. Um, that being, if you compare it to boxing, for example, boxing, you're limited to just striking. Beyond just being limited to striking, you're only limited to using your hands. You can't elbow, you can't kick, you can't knee. So the lack of options there tends to kind of push me off. I'll still watch boxing if it's high level boxing where I'm getting to the point where I can watch guys who are at a level that's just like well above what I normally see in MMA. But just like mid level boxing really doesn't do anything for me. High level boxing does. Then there's kickboxing, which they don't really have much grappling. In Muay Thai, they do have some throws, but they don't really like do anything on the mat. But there are knees. In Muay Thai, there's elbows, although not every kickboxing form has elbows. But you're opening up a little bit more. I like watching that even more than boxing. But it's a much type of thing where I like to see the highest level guys. And then with MMA, you have the knees, you have the elbows, you have the punches, you have the kicks, but then you also have wrestling, you have jiu-jitsu, and that's really what interests me most. So for me, the highest form of martial arts that I can watch is MMA. I watch jiu-jitsu as well. That's a little bit different just because I'm a participant in it, so I don't mind watching like mid-level stuff because I'm a mid-level guy myself. I'm a purple belt, so watching other purple belts is perfectly fine for me. But beyond that, to get back to bare knuckle boxing, to me, this makes sense if you kind of think through fight sports through the lens of what used to be popular in the days of old, where boxing was really popular in the days of old. So this is like a more extreme version of boxing. But boxing, as I mentioned, in and of itself, is a very limited art form. In that, like I mentioned, you basically have a quarter of the strikes illegal. So you have the two punches, so that's two. Then there's two elbows that aren't, so that's two out of four. Two knees that aren't, two out of six, and then two kicks that aren't, so two out of eight. So you have this limited form of fighting, and now they're just saying, okay, we're going to do that, but we're going to take the gloves off, which effectively just means that the boxer is going to get cut up really bad and their hands are going to get broken more often. So does that do anything for me? Not at all. So for bare knuckle boxing, I guess if you just like watching fights in general, this can be interesting to you, but it's not even like they're getting the highest level guys. Like I mentioned with boxing, I'll still watch boxing because I can see some of the highest level boxers compete, but you're not even getting the highest level boxers in these bare knuckle boxing matches. What you're getting is basically UFC castaways. I mean, I really like watching Jason Knight fight. It's kind of a shame that he lost his last few fights and got booted from the UFC, but he's a guy who I'll watch in MMA, partly because I like watching him play off his back. But I'm not really interested in seeing him just do bare knuckle boxing. Same with Artem Lobov. I like seeing him fighting MMA. I don't like to see him fighting in bare knuckle boxing. So while I would watch a Lobov versus Knight fight regardless, I'd much rather watch this in the UFC than watch it in bare knuckle FC, for example. There's a lot more to see in the UFC than there is to see in this form here. So moving forward, anytime there is another event like this, am I interested in it? No. There may be some interesting matchups that I would like more in MMA than in bare knuckle boxing that they put together in bare knuckle boxing. But to me, this is just a bit of it's an unnecessary sport at this point. You're going to the same type of thing with boxing where you're just only using two strikes as opposed to eight strikes, and you're not even doing any grappling. So you get this limited form of fighting. It's whether we would call it barbaric or not. It's not like it turns me off that these guys are getting cut up more, but it's just to me it just seems unnecessary. Like it's not really like adding any value to me. So to have these guys getting their faces sliced open by knuckles just doesn't, or at least at a higher pace than what you would see in boxing or in MMA, just doesn't do anything for me. So I'm probably not going to watch a whole lot of this in the future. Didn't really watch this one now. I just got some more clips online and actually watched the whole fight. So we'll see how it goes. It's interesting that there are some investors like the Feldman guy who's behind this who are throwing a lot of money behind it. They're paying these athletes really well, which generally is not going to be an effective sign. We've seen this in MMA before where people come out of nowhere and they decide, hey, look, I've got a bunch of money. I'm going to spend all this money on this talent and just draw away some high level guys or draw away some guys at least to have a big name. But what they end up finding is that they pay these guys much more than they're worth. The additional sales they're able to get from it don't match up to the high price that they're paying. And I'd imagine that probably Malignaggi, who was saying that he wasn't planning on doing this in the first place until he got his offer, He's probably getting paid a lot more than the value he's going to be able to bring back. And we'll see if Feldman and anyone else who does bare knuckle boxing decides that it's worth continuing to put up these shows if they're losing more money than they're making. So we'll see how that happens. But to me, if you want to do bare knuckle MMA, that might be a little bit more interesting to me. I think there are some things that the gloves do that complicate MMA, especially on the grappling realm. It's a lot harder to sink and chokes with the gloves than it is without them. So maybe some bare knuckle MMA matches would be something new and something interesting to me. But to do a form of boxing that's just more bloody unnecessarily, that's just bringing in guys who aren't exactly even at that high of a level, it's nothing for me. It just isn't that exciting, especially when you're bringing back guys like Chris Lieben, who retired from MMA rightfully. So I think at the end of a long run of his career, it was fun watching him fight while he was in his prime. But at this point, it's just that's what he knows best, and that's a way that he can make quick money. So I don't blame him for doing it, but I really don't want to see it anymore.